I thought of ministers as they're in church and they lead worship and offer pastoral care. And here this guy was working in an office at the university and really concerned about what was going on in the world. And so I wanted to be a part of that and was involved as a student in the Eco-Justice Project. Being involved in those social movements really became my passion. And here I was studying mechanical engineering. And it was at the time that Ronald Reagan was doing the military buildup, and most of the jobs at that time for engineers that had just graduated were in the military-industrial complex. And given my concern about the arms race, I really didn't want to go into that line of work. I also didn't want to work for General Electric to make a better refrigerator or a better toaster. And I also learned that sort of my idols like Thomas Edison and the early inventors of our technology, Alexander Graham Bell, people like that, it was different now. Technology had become more complex, and you got to work on one little piece of a much larger project, and that didn't go well for me either. So I started thinking, well, I'll go into the Peace Corps, and I applied to the Peace Corps. They offered me a position in Latin America, and the job description was, you're going to go out into the jungle and survey the jungle so that the government that you'll be working with can make strategic hamlets for the native peoples in the jungle to live in. That didn't sound so good to me. It didn't really go with my politics, so I decided to forego that position, put my resume out there, and I ended up being a volunteer in mission at Stony Point Conference Center, which is a National Presbyterian Conference Center of the Presbyterian Church in the Hudson River Valley, just north of New York City. I had been a volunteer in mission twice before for summers as a college student, first at Ghost Ranch, where I was on the college staff, and then in Southeast Alaska, where I taught vacation Bible school in really isolated villages and logging camps and canneries. And that experience of being a volunteer in mission sort of opened my eyes to the wider denomination, because the church I had been in really didn't connect youth with stuff that the presbytery was doing or the denomination was doing. So it wasn't until I was in college and part of campus ministry that I learned about all the opportunities that the wider denomination offers. So I went to Stony Point Conference Center, and it was an international community right there. All of the staff came from different countries. We had a business manager who was in exile from Iran. His name was Mehdi Abhari, and he was there with his family. There was a reservations person from the Philippines, Corasobra Peña. We had other visiting people who were either missionaries on furlough, who were then going to go back into the mission field, or they were pastors in exile from South Korea or from Chile, where there was persecution of people of faith. And so I got to spend 3 years at Stony Point Conference Center in this really intentional community, international community that was very concerned about the church, the wider church, universal, ecumenism, working with other denominations, and on issues of justice and mission. We had something called Global Village every summer, where families would come, and there were 5 different places you could stay, and each one represented a different continent with a family from that continent, and you learned about the culture and the church there and what they ate, and did all kinds of things learning about different cultures. So I had a great time at Stony Point, first on the staff there, and then as the peacemaking intern for the Synod of the Northeast, which comprises New England, New York, and New Jersey. And it was just at the time that the Presbyterian Church was starting its peacemaking program. Peacemaking the Believer's Calling was passed by our General Assembly in 1980. And it was a way of the Synod trying to jumpstart peacemaking committees and ministry in presbyteries and congregations all throughout the Northeast. So I did that for 2 more years, got involved in things like Witness for Peace. As a young adult, I went to Nicaragua on the 5th short-term mission that went to the border between Honduras and Nicaragua. trying to be really a nonviolent deterrent to the guerrilla war that was going on there. I also went to the Soviet Union with Fellowship of Reconciliation and Promoting Enduring Peace. They had a series of sort of citizen diplomacy missions. This one brought us to Moscow and Kiev, and included a river tour of the Volga River. And each place we stopped and we got to know the culture. We met with citizens, people from the Russian Orthodox Church, peace organizations. So that was a real eye-opener also for me in my 20s. About the same time, the Presbyterian Church had a study tour throughout Eastern and Western Europe for young adults in college and just out of college. I think there were, 20, 25 of us who went to the Netherlands to learn about the Euromissile controversy at that time. We were sending over cruise missiles to the Netherlands. We went to Northern Ireland to learn about the conflict between English and Irish, Protestant and Catholic, and went to the Corrymeela community, which is an ecumenical community of reconciliation. We went to Geneva, Switzerland, and learned about the Reformation and Calvin, who preached there, and really started the Reformed Christian movement that John Knox then took to Scotland, and Scots brought over here, as those of you from St. Andrew's Society know. I'm going to lose my train of thought. Oh yes, so we're in Europe with these young adults. We also went to Hungary and learned about economic issues in a communist country. And we went to Germany, both to East Germany and West Germany when the Berlin Wall was still up. And we saw the Berlin Wall, and this was about 5 years before it came down. We talked with church officials and said, so when is the Berlin Wall going to come down? Is there ever any hope of reconciliation? Berlin Wall will never come down. We're always going to be divided. It's a pipe dream to think otherwise. And 5 years later, the Berlin Wall came down. So never say never. Okay, so at Stony Point, I did a lot of reading, particularly in this area of peacemaking. I read things by Dorothy Day, who founded the Catholic Worker Movement, Martin Luther King Jr., Mohandas Gandhi, Henry Nouwen on spirituality, Thomas Merton, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, The Cost of Discipleship. And those were really formative years for me at Stony Point with this community and the reading I was doing and these study tours that I had been on. And it came to a time, well, I'm finishing my volunteer and mission years. What am I going to do next? Graduate school, of course. And I thought about, well, should I go to seminary or should I go to graduate school and study international affairs? I know I'll choose one school, one seminary, and one graduate school for international affairs, and wherever I get in, that'll make the decision for me. I got into both. Didn't help. At the time, they were saying that there were lots and lots of Presbyterian ministers that couldn't find positions, and so I thought, well, I don't need to be a pastor. I'd be happy being a layperson and educated in a particular area and serve the church that way. So I went to the University of Denver to study international affairs at Graduate School of International Studies, and I found out yesterday that Eleanor Milroy and I were there the very same year. Unbelievable. I lived on campus, she was living in a convent. So I went there for a year, and about the same time, Susan was in Micronesia working with the Methodist Church in the Nuclear-Free and Independent Pacific movement, a place called Palau. And we were corresponding back and forth. We were just friends, but the correspondence led us to think, you know, we probably ought to be in the same city for a while to see if this relationship's going anywhere. So instead of spending my second year in Denver and finishing my degree, I found a job with Clergy and Laity Concerned in New York City, which was first started as Clergy and Laymen Concerned about Vietnam. It was started by William Sloane Coffin, Rabbi Abraham Heschel, Daniel Berrigan, folks like that. Clergy and Laymen Concerned about Vietnam. It was an effort to get the religious community behind the anti-war movement in the 60s. And it was still going in the 80s as a more multicultural, multiracial justice and peace organization with chapters all around the country. So I said, okay, I will take this position working on disarmament and militarism in New York so I can be in the same city where Susan will be, because when she came back, she was going to work with the Methodists at the Church Center at the United Nations. And one thing led to another, and we decided, well, we don't need to be in the same city for a year. Let's just get married. So we got married at Stony Point Conference Center. I was a member of Stony Point Presbyterian Church at that time, and the conference center was a great place to be able to bring, family and friends and stay for the weekend and have our reception there. So that was 31 years ago that we got married in Stony Point, New York. We joined Park Slope United Methodist Church, which was in Park Slope, Brooklyn. Susan had already been going there, and so I joined. It was a very progressive Methodist church, so progressive that when Daniel Ortega, the Sandinista president of Nicaragua, came to the UN to speak, our pastor, who was very involved in Witness for Peace, invited him to speak at our church. And so that day, the Secret Service came in early with dogs, sniffing the whole sanctuary, clearing the place. And after worship, after the benediction, Daniel Ortega came and spoke to our congregation, which, it was full and got great publicity. So we were part of that church for a few years. It was also a reconciling congregation, and so that was my first exposure to the welcoming churches movement, welcoming gay and lesbian people into full membership and participation in the Christian community. I finished my degree doing coursework at Columbia University, and about that same time, Susan went up to Boston to be part of something called the Women's Theological Center, which was a one-year certificate program in feminist theology and how it connects with various forms of oppression. So I followed her there and found a position with the Albert Einstein Institution, which was founded by Gene Sharp to study nonviolent struggle, people power movements that were going on all over the world, using methods of nonviolent action, protests and boycotts and that sort of thing to bring about social change. It was people power movements that undermined the communist regimes in Eastern Europe in 1989 and led to change there. It was the same time that the Chinese students were protesting in Tiananmen Square, and the anti-apartheid movement was going very strongly in South Africa. So it was a very fruitful time to be studying nonviolent struggle, and it was there that I edited an encyclopedia of nonviolent action called Protest, Power, and Change that was published about 20 years ago now. On the church side, we found a church called Church of the Covenant, which was in the Back Bay of Boston, Federated Church, Presbyterian Church USA, and United Church of Christ. And we very quickly got very much involved in that congregation. That's where I was ordained as an elder and got put on session, and then I was church treasurer and started preaching on occasion and leading church school and pretty much everything that you could possibly do as a layperson in the church, I had done, with the exception of going to the hospital to provide pastoral care to people who were in crisis. So once I left the Albert Einstein Institution, I had had a couple of decades of people in the church saying, "So Roger, when are you going to seminary?" And me saying, "Oh, I don't think I'm going to seminary. I'm in the peacemaking and I'm doing all this nonprofit work, and I don't think, no." and I was looking for what to do next, Susan said, well, you should talk to a vocational counselor. So I went to Radcliffe, and I went through all the battery of tests, about your interests and your personality profile and what you enjoy doing. And I went in, got all the results, and they said, someone as idealistic as you in their mid-30s usually goes into the ministry. It's like, that's not what I wanted you to say. So I was continuing to job hunt, looking at other things, and I said, okay, well, my stopgap, if I don't find a job by this fall, I'm going to have a seminary to go to. So I applied to Andover Newton Theological Seminary, which was near Boston, and I said, if I don't get a position, I'll try it. I'll dip my toe in the water and see. Because here I had an engineering background, bachelor's degree, and a master's degree in international politics. I had never studied philosophy, had never studied religion, certainly not biblical languages. So I wasn't quite sure I was going to do okay or enjoy it. Did not find a position. My last interview was in the Netherlands to be the executive director of the International Fellowship of Reconciliation. And I was one of 3 candidates. There was another candidate from Germany, one from the Netherlands, and I was the US candidate. And they flew all of us, all 3, to the Netherlands for a week-long interview process. And it was great, but I didn't get the job. And the day I came back was the first day of classes at Andover Newton. So I started there, and I did well the first semester. And I said, well, maybe I could finish this degree, and I had done editing at the Albert Einstein Institution. Maybe I could get into editing theological books, or I liked campus ministry. Maybe I could go into campus ministry, but I certainly don't want to be pastor of a church. God had other ideas, you'll see. I went through clinical pastoral education my first summer after my first year at Mass General Hospital. This is where you are sort of a hospital chaplain intern for a summer, and you learn what it is to offer pastoral care to people who are not feeling very well. And you do so with a cohort of other colleagues from different seminaries. And unlike some people who have terrible experiences in CPE, I had a wonderful experience. I had a great supervisor, I had wonderful colleagues, and it was out of that summer experience that I found, well, yes, I can offer pastoral care and do okay at it. And I think I will start the ordination process. Now, mind you, other people were still saying, so it's great you're in seminary, when are you going to be in the ordination process? All the way along from high school on, people in the church were seeing gifts for ministry that I had that I wasn't seeing in myself. So really, instead of a bolt of lightning kind of call experience, I had this experience of voices from the church speaking on behalf of God saying, you need to go to seminary, you need to be a pastor. I started thinking about all of our friends. They were all pastors, or chaplains at hospitals, or chaplains at colleges, or teaching theology or ethics. And one of them said one day, Roger, you wouldn't know God's call if God put a billboard on your front lawn. What's the deal? So I started the ordination process. I was also at the time, I was very involved in presbytery as a layperson, as an elder from Church of the Covenant, was on the Committee on Ministry, and went to the Synod of the Northeast meeting as a commissioner. And then I got a phone call from the nominating committee, would you consider being vice moderator, and chair of council for the presbytery? I said, well, I'm in seminary, can I do that? And they assured me I could. I said, what about like installing pastors and ordaining people? I mean, sure, you can do that too. You're a ruling elder, you can do it. So while I was going through seminary, I was also going through the vice moderator, and chair of council for Boston Presbytery. And because we had spent so much time in welcoming churches and had a number of gay and lesbian friends at this point through the church, and also knew some gay and lesbian pastors who were having to be in the closet because it was not legal by our church constitution for gay and lesbian folks to be ordained. I did not want to take my heterosexual privilege for granted. I did not want to just go through the process and say, yeah, I'm here, I want to be ordained. So when I met with the Committee on Preparation for Ministry, I refused to tell them my marital status, the gender of my partner, or my sexual orientation. And the Committee on Preparation for Ministry was not too happy. They said, they called me back the next month and wanted to talk to me about that some more. And they said, well, you know, this is a long process and we're willing to let you start, but you know, eventually this is going to catch up to you and you need to know that you may not get approved at the end of the process. Okay. You have your annual meeting with the committee, go through all the hoops of ordination exams, field ed. My field ed was at Old Cambridge Baptist Church right next to the Harvard campus, and I worked in campus ministry with students at Harvard. Also during seminary, I worked half-time as a campus minister at the University of Vermont in Burlington, which is 3 or 4 hours away from Boston. I was sort of an unintentional interim in that I was there for 1.5 years following someone who'd been on the faculty and there for 20 years as a campus minister. But I would drive up from Boston early Monday morning, spend 2 or 3 days there, come back for classes, worship at Church of the Covenant, and then go right back to Burlington, Vermont. It was not an ideal way to be a spouse or be a seminary student or be a campus minister on campus. And so after 1.5 years, I said, you know, I'm shortchanging everybody here, and as much as I like this experience, it was clear it was not going to become a full-time thing that I could get ordained to, so I decided to end that and finished my 4th year of seminary and got ready for the ordination process. So my final, I had dotted all the I's, crossed all the T's. I get back to the Committee on Preparation for Ministry and they say, so what about your partner? Oh, is this a business partner? Who's your partner? What are you talking about? What's your... And, you know, it says in our Constitution that you will do X, Y, and Z, and can you abide by that? Yeah, I can abide by that. Well, yeah, but... So after some duress, this was an hour-long meeting, I said, okay, I don't want to tell you this because I don't think it's any of your business. It's your business whether I'd be a good pastor or not, but I've been married to the same woman for the last 20 years. And their jaws dropped. Here's this white, straight, married guy coming out to them. The former moderator of the presbytery, and you know, we went through all the, you're gonna go to presbytery with me? Well, I'll have to go in a separate car and I can't sit with you because if we sit together or they see us in the same car, they're gonna think, oh, well, maybe that's his partner, right? So we were in the closet, not at church, but at presbytery. So they deliberated for quite some time, and in the end, they voted 3-2 to bring me to presbytery. And on the floor of presbytery, the chair of the committee didn't just say, well, you know, we passed him. He said, the presbytery needs to know what we've been through with this candidate. Your former moderator. He has not been forthcoming. He's not been cooperative. We don't think that he's willing to abide by the constitution of our church. Majority rules. The committee passed him. But what are you talking about? Sign his paper so he can circulate his profile. So under duress, the chair of the committee had to sign the paper, and I went on from there. And my first call was at Montclair Presbyterian Church in Oakland, California, as associate pastor. I was there for 4 years. It was a wonderful first call. Worked with Karen Stokes, who was the senior pastor there. It was a very progressive church. They had 4 mission and social justice committees. One was on global concerns, one was a more light committee, one was Echo Stewards, and one was community action. And my job as associate pastor was to work with those 4 committees and preach once every 5 or 6 weeks, do a little pastoral care, but about 70% of my time was in community ministry, doing work with the Oakland Coalition of Congregations, which was a Gamaliel faith-based community organization. Chaired their clergy caucus for 3 years. I was involved in the Interfaith Power and Light movement when that got started, Interfaith Worker Justice in the East Bay, working with unions and the religious community. So that was a great experience for me. After about 4 years, I realized, well, I'd really like to have my own church. Because, as the associate pastor, you often don't get to do the baptisms and the weddings. And when people need counseling, they want to go to the real pastor, the senior pastor. So there were things I wasn't getting to do, and I was only preaching once every 5 or 6 weeks. And when I talked with Susan, all of our family were still on the East Coast, and we decided, I'll just look on the East Coast and we won't stay in California. So I found 2 churches that brought their nominating committees together to find one person to fill 2 half-time positions. Presbyterian Church, which is a small congregation just a couple blocks from the inner harbor of a few more blocks from Ravens and Orioles stadiums, looking for a half-time installed solo pastor. Franklin Street Presbyterian Church, which was the first Presbyterian church in Baltimore and predates Baltimore Presbytery, it goes back to the 1700s, big tall steeple church, was looking for a half-time associate pastor. And they ended up calling me to be in those 2 positions. So I had a full-time call, but it split between 2 churches. I did that for about 4 years, finally left First and Franklin after that, and became a temporary supply of a nearby church that was also small, but needed someone, and I could do their service and then come to Light Street because they were only about 10 minutes away. That temporary supply position lasted for 5 years. And then at the same time, I was saying, I'd really like to be in one church full-time where I could focus my efforts and not be so schizophrenic. Because, when you're dealing with 2 churches, it's 2 sessions, 2 bulletins, 2 worship services, sometimes 2 sermons, most of the time 1 sermon. But you're not focused. You're always thinking about these 2 different communities. And so I was thrilled when St. Andrew said, we'd like you to be our new pastor. And that brings me full circle to the end of my time. Let's see if I missed anything. In Baltimore, I was very involved in the partnership that some churches had with churches in Cuba, very much like in Santa Fe Presbytery. Our church became a sister church of the Paraíso Church in central Cuba, El Centro Presbytery. That was about 11 years ago. About 10 years ago, the Presbytery of Baltimore decided to partner with El Centro Presbytery, and I was very much a part of the coordinating team that worked on that partnership together. During that time, I went to Cuba 10 times in the last 11 years, spending about a week at a time each time. I have a little Spanish, enough to be polite, enough to be able to read a sermon in Spanish, so I preached there a few times, but not enough to have much of a conversation. So I'm kind of hoping that now that I'm in New Mexico, I'll have more opportunity to learn and practice than I did in Baltimore. I also went through the 3-year thing of being moderator at Baltimore Presbytery, which was also very rewarding. And it was hard to leave Baltimore Presbytery, but I think I'm going to enjoy Santa Fe Presbytery. It's also a wonderful presbytery like Baltimore is. Also very involved in Cuba. And I think this congregation is very much like some of the others that I've served. So I feel very much at home. Are there any questions? I've talked a lot.
Well, are you 110?
Am I 110? Yeah, me and Methuselah. All those biblical characters, 120 years old. No, I'm 57. Yeah. Yeah, Willard.
So, when did you realize, or when did you start to figure out that maybe what the press was telling you and the president and other people in government really wasn't necessarily true, and that you began this progressive journey that you've been on all your life? And was it something, did you pick this up from your parents, or your Sunday school, or a preacher, or?
That was my rebellion from my parents in high school. My parents were staunch Republicans. My father was a business executive who commuted into New York City on the Long Island Railroad every day. I remember in high school, well, gee, I remember in elementary school, watching television news in our den and seeing, the police dogs and the fire hoses in Birmingham, and coming back to school and wanting to talk about that with my teachers and with my friends and what was going on down there. I thought a lot about Martin Luther King Jr. My dad called him a troublemaker. At that time, he wasn't a hero for everyone. I remember reading a book about the treatment of Native Americans. I don't know if it was Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee or something else, but I was like a junior in high school, and it so impacted me that I screamed and cried at my parents, why weren't they doing something to help the Native Americans? And my parents sort of rolled my eyes. What are we going to do on Long Island about Native Americans 100 years ago or whatever? But that sense of injustice and wanting to right wrongs. I also did a lot of traveling, starting with my parents, because I was the youngest of three, and by the time I came around, my father was doing some international stuff with engineering societies, and he would bring my mom and me with him. We went to some of the countries in the Pacific Rim when I was 10 years old. And I have this vivid image of being in Bangkok, Thailand, in an air-conditioned tour bus, going by shanties. There were rivers or a delta or something in Thailand where there are these villages that are built completely on stilts. And the water is brown and really filthy. But people, that's their water supply for everything. So you see people cooking with the water, you see people bathing their kids in the water, you see doing laundry in the water, and it's filthy brown underneath these. That was a huge impression on me when I was 10 years old. How is it that I get to live the way I'm living, and these people live like this? It's not fair. And so, between that and then in college, hearing from William Sloane Coffin and seeing the Hiroshima and Nagasaki film, that was sort of the justice and peacemaking stuff that, but my parents were, you can't fight City Hall, they would say. Or, I'd tell my mom, the president is lying. And the president wouldn't lie, was her response, And then in graduate school, you learn in international politics that governments have a stated policy and a real policy. And the real policy isn't always stated. It's, the stated policy is for public consumption, because they would never stand to know what the real policy was. I didn't go into diplomacy either. In fact, I remember one simulation in graduate school where we had to represent the State Department's perspective on something. And I had to represent the US State Department's support for the Contras going into Nicaragua. And here I'd been on Witness for Peace stuff, and I was like, there's no justification for this at all. How could I do that? And in the middle of the simulation, I burst out and said that. And I got a very bad grade for that assignment. Yeah. Does that answer the question? Yeah. Anything else? Yeah, Max.
I'm curious, as I was listening to and following along, what I must say is a very fascinating story of a journey.
Yeah, thanks.
I was struck by sort of, at 2 points you were talking about an examination situation.
Mm.
And for confirmation, you were
Mhm.
saying, well, you had all these questions
Right.
and all this stuff in the Apostles' Creed, you didn't understand
Mhm.
anything.
Yeah.
You didn't say anything about what had transpired in that regard by the time you got to your ordination
Mm-hmm.
exam.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious.
I still had lots of questions, but the questions get refined. I still have questions now. With is it Maria Rilke? Rilke's the last name. What's the first two names? Rainer Maria Rilke. Live the questions, right? That's what my spiritual journey has been about theologically, is living the questions. I have a whole lot more questions than I have answers, but the questions get refined. So, I went from does God exist to what is my image of God? What is my experience of God? What do I mean when I say God? You in church school maybe have this vision of the old man up in the clouds, thanks to Michelangelo. How do you move from that to the God that is beyond time and space and that created the entire universe, which is much greater than my mind can fathom? I did skip over something. When I was on the college staff at Ghost Ranch, I had my one mystical experience. And I was up on the upper mesa by a campfire. I took my leave from the campfire for a little while. I wanted to get away from the light so I could see the stars. And I looked up at the sky, and for those of you who have been up to Ghost Ranch, you know how there's very little ambient light, and so the Milky Way is very milky, and you can see star clusters and nebula and all kinds of things almost with your naked eye. It's so amazing. There was a moment there that was sort of a peak experience of all at the same time realizing that everything's connected, everything is one, and it blew my mind. It's very hard to explain a mystical experience, but I was sort of hurled into this other dimension or something where I had this connection with God and the universe as creator. And so that's been a big place where my faith and my interest in science has come together, is thinking about God as creator and sustainer of this universe, as Carl Sagan used to say, with billions of stars and billions of galaxies. And it's sort of, I mean, for the Orthodox, it's the Trinity. How do you figure out how three is one? Well, how do you figure out the universe is, how do you put words to it? I don't know. But yeah, that was my own mystical experience looking up at the sky in Ghost Ranch. So I still have questions. I don't have a lot of answers. You'll hear both in my sermons. And I hope we can live the questions together.
Just as a quick follow-up.
Yeah.
It sounds like you were really fortunate. You made it explicit as a confirmation in
Yeah.
the sense that you had to have people in the position of authority within the church
Yes.
who allowed you to experience these as gateways,
Yes.
not as barriers.
Yes.
But you hear so many experiences I've shared with people in this congregation and other places where ordination questions have been presented as barriers
Mhm.
that
Sure.
keep people from furthering their faith journey.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts about that?
Human institutions are not perfect. And the church is a human institution, even though Christ is the head of it. And I think we've done a grave injustice when we have hurled up barriers and obstacles in people's way. I mean, in the end, it's all mystery, right? So who are we to say that, you know, you've got to believe X, Y, and Z, or you're out of here? I think Jesus was much more open and welcoming and accommodating than that. Yeah.
I've got 3 questions, nowhere near Max's level. The first one is, what do you do for fun? And Susan, you can be ready, because I'll be asking that one in 2 weeks, or did she leave? No.
She's here.
Okay, but I can't
Yeah.
think through everybody.
Yep.
Okay, so what do you do for fun?
I enjoy music, concerts, plays, all kinds of performing arts. I love to golf. I was at Arroyo del Oso on Friday morning, my day off at 6:30. Third group off, it's great. I enjoy hiking, being outdoors. Love to sail, but that's not going to happen much in New Mexico. I grew up sailing on Long Island Sound.
Cochiti Lake is an experience in sailing.
Cochiti Lake?
Yeah.
Okay.
It can be exciting.
Okay, all right. I will tell you this, that over the last year in Baltimore, I branched out and started taking improv classes with the Baltimore Improv Group. I took 4 classes, and I understand there's a improv group in Albuquerque, so I'm thinking about looking into that.
Ask Irene, our daughter that's in the nursery.
Okay.
She knows a lot of the people that are involved.
Great, okay, I'll do that.
Okay, so my second question is, and I already know the answer to this, are you going to Quarai this afternoon?
Yes.
Just in case that encourages anybody to come. He drove me up to Santa Fe and back, and Sharon, Craig, and I were able to talk everybody into going up through the mountains. So that was pretty cool.
Yep.
There was a wreck in Algodones, we had a reason. And my final question is, and I'm asking this because I was at a church one time where they had a real candidating thing like this. Where the person was really on the spot. And it wasn't me that asked this question, but he asked, Star Wars or Star Trek? I'd like to get this right down to the nitty-gritty.
Both. It's got to be both. I grew up with Star Trek, and then Star Wars came in, and now they live together.
You don't go by Reverend Roger Powers, you don't go by Roger S. Powers, you go by Roger Scott Powers.
Yeah.
Tell us the significance of Scott. I assume Powers is your family name.
Powers is my family name. I was named at birth Roger Scott Powers. It has nothing to do with ancestors or anything. My parents just thought it sounded good. I never used Scott until I got ordained. And I decided that when I get ordained, I'm going to start using my middle name as well, at least in writing. But I'm very informal. I want people to call me Roger, not Reverend Powers, not Pastor, just Roger. I don't like to stand on ceremony. But in writing, you'll see it Roger Scott Powers. Yeah. Anything else? Carol?
Just thank you for sharing your faith journey, which is your life journey, which is still going on.
Hmm?
And for those of us who have done this and have listened to other people's journeys, I just think it's so valuable. And I hope that we will continue to do this throughout the congregation, because what we learn is not only our differences and basic value systems, but also our similarities.
Yeah.
And that we're all a community. And I just am thrilled that you were able to share this with us. So thank you.
Thank you all for coming.